The ferry had been moving for less than 20 minutes when I realized I had spent the entire departure watching the wrong direction. Most people were facing north. They had cameras out, phones raised, children pressed against the rail as the water opened ahead of us. Someone behind me was explaining the route through the inside passage in the confident tone of a man who had read half a brochure and decided to become an expert. I was looking south. Bellingham had already shrunk into shoreline, roofs, and distance. I told myself I was checking whether the weather would hold. That was a lie. I wanted to watch my old life get smaller. The wind off the water was cold enough to make my eyes sting. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and stayed at the rail anyway. 3 days earlier, I had handed my office keys to my sister. 3 days earlier, I had slept on an air mattress in an apartment that technically no longer belonged to me. Yesterday, I had signed another stack of documents in the long process of transferring my minority share in the family company, and that morning, at 39 years old, I had boarded a ferry to Alaska because flying would have been too fast. "You know the scenery's better on the other side." The voice came from close enough that I turned before I could decide whether I wanted company. The man beside me was tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark knit cap and a canvas jacket that looked like it had survived actual work. His face was weathered in a way mine never would be, no matter how much time I spent outdoors pretending meetings counted as hardship. Dark beard, some gray along the jaw, brown eyes. He smiled, not broadly, just enough to make it obvious he knew I had been staring at Washington like it owed me money. "I've seen Washington," I said. "Bad breakup?" I laughed before I meant to. "With the state?" "Could be. People get dramatic around departure terminals." "I'm not dramatic." He looked toward the vanishing shoreline. Sure, there was something immediately irritating about how comfortable he seemed. Also attractive. Those two things did not cancel each other out. I turned back to the water. "I'm relocating temporarily." That sounds less dramatic. It's accurate, which is not the same thing. I looked at him. He held out a hand. "Wes." His palm was rough, and there were pale scars across 2 fingers. Not old man hands, working hands. "Calvin. Heading all the way north, Calvin?" "Anchorage eventually." He nodded toward the ship. "Work? Contract?" That answer was aggressively short. I smiled despite myself. "Operations consulting." That one sounded rehearsed. It wasn't. It absolutely was. I had known him 40 seconds. He had already identified 2 things my sister had been complaining about for years. That felt rude. "What about you?" I asked. "Juneau. Work? Going home." The phrase landed more heavily than it should have. Maybe because I had been staring at mine disappearing. I glanced south again. Wes followed my eyes. "Going home?" he asked. "No." He waited. I could have left it there. Instead I said, pretty much the opposite. For the first time, the joking eased from his face. He didn't ask what happened. That made me want to tell him more. I hated people who were good at that. The wind cut across the deck again, and Wes shifted closer so I could hear him over the engines. "First time on the ferry? Is it obvious? You're standing in the cold looking backward. What should I be doing? Complaining about the cafeteria and guarding a window seat like your family's honor depends on it. You sound experienced. Grew up in Juneau." That made sense in a way I immediately distrusted. Wes looked like someone who belonged to places with mountains visible from parking lots. I looked like someone who had opinions about conference room chairs. "You live there now?" He paused, just long enough for me to notice. "Tacoma. So, you're going home from home." That sounded philosophical. It wasn't. It absolutely was. I laughed again. A woman pushed through the deck door behind us, wrestling with a hood the wind kept throwing into her face, and Wes stepped aside to give her space. His hand touched the middle of my back for less than a second. Practical. Barely contact. My body noticed anyway. That was inconvenient. I moved toward the door. "You escaping?" he asked. "My fingers have stopped participating." "Breakfast tomorrow?" I stopped. There was no hesitation in his voice. No elaborate setup. No pretending we might coincidentally occupy the same table on a ship large enough to avoid one another if we wanted. "Are you always this efficient?" "Only with strangers." "That seems backward." "You'll know me tomorrow." I stared at him. Wes lifted one eyebrow. "Breakfast," I said. "Good." He gave me a small salute and stayed outside. I went in smiling like an idiot. By dinner, I had managed to convince myself breakfast was simply two travelers being social. Then I saw Wes in the cafeteria and crossed the room before he noticed me. So much for that theory. He was sitting alone, with something that looked like soup, and had probably begun life with better ambitions. I set my tray down across from him. "You're early." He checked the clock on the wall. "For breakfast?" "Very. I was hungry. You could have eaten somewhere else." He looked around at the room. "We're on a ferry, Calvin." "Fair." His eyes dropped briefly to my tray. "You chose the fish." "I'm on a boat." "That was your reasoning?" "Yes. That is the kind of optimism that gets people hurt." I sat down. 10 minutes later, we were talking like we had missed a conversation earlier, and were trying to catch up. Wes owned a marine fabrication shop in Tacoma. Railings, custom aluminum work, repairs, commercial jobs. He had 11 employees when everybody showed up, and 9 when 2 particular men decided deer season. "Family company?" "My father started it." "And you?" "Operations director." Past tense again. I looked at him. He was tearing bread in half, watching me without pretending he wasn't. "Yes." "What happened?" The honest answer was too large for cafeteria lighting and plastic cutlery, so I gave him a smaller one. "I stopped wanting the next version of the same job." Wes considered that. "Okay." That was it. No speech about courage. No question about whether my father understood. No immediate attempt to turn one sentence into a diagnosis. I picked up my fork. "You're not going to tell me I was brave?" "No." "Good. I don't know if you were." I laughed so sharply, the man at the next table glanced over. Wes looked pleased. "Maybe you made a terrible mistake." "Thank you." "You're welcome. And you're going back to Juneau because—" "My dad." The humor didn't disappear, but it shifted. "How is he?" "Annoyed." "That's a medical condition?" "For him, yes." I waited. Wes rubbed his thumb over one of the scars on his hand. "He had a health thing a couple weeks ago. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that my sister and I decided somebody should take a look at how he's managing." "And you're somebody." "I'm apparently the somebody with the flexible schedule. You own a business." I said flexible, not empty. There was more there. I could tell. He could probably tell I knew. Neither of us reached for it yet. Instead, he asked where I was staying in Anchorage and whether I knew anyone there. I told him about the consulting firm, the temporary apartment they had arranged, the 12-week contract. "What happens after 12 weeks?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. It was the first question anyone had asked me in months, for which I had not prepared an answer. Wes waited. I looked down at my plate. "That," I said finally, "is an excellent question." "Ah, what?" "Nothing." You made a face. I did not. You absolutely did. He leaned back. You like plans. I like knowing what I'm doing. That's a plan with better marketing. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I noticed the lines at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. I noticed his forearms, where his sleeves were pushed up. I noticed the easy way he occupied space without seeming to demand any of it. And when he looked at me again, something in his expression changed just enough that I wondered if he had been doing his own inventory. Neither of us looked away quickly. The ferry moved steadily beneath us. Somewhere beyond the dark windows, Washington was already far behind. For the first time since I had boarded, I forgot to wonder how far. The next morning, I found Wes waiting in the observation lounge. There was an empty chair beside him. He didn't call attention to it. He just looked up as I approached. "Morning. You expecting someone?" I was hoping. That landed harder than it had any right to. I sat down. Outside, the coastline moved past in long, dark green shapes, mountains lifting behind it. Wes pointed toward a distant channel and leaned close enough that his shoulder pressed against mine. Neither of us moved. "You'll get better views farther north," he said. I turned my head. He was still looking out the window. "You always know what's ahead." That made him smile. "No." Then he looked at me. Not even close. By late morning, I had learned 3 things about Wes Carver. He hated instant coffee. He could identify islands I had never heard of, from shapes that looked identical to me. And when he did not want to answer a question, he smiled, like the question had amused him instead. The third thing interested me most. We were standing on the covered section of the passenger deck, protected from the worst of the wind, but not the cold. The water had narrowed between steep forested slopes, dark green climbing into low cloud. Wes had been telling me which stretches of coastline he remembered from childhood, not dramatically. No stories about wilderness shaping him into a better man. Mostly he remembered places because somebody had lost a fishing rod there, thrown up there, broken an ankle there, or made a terrible romantic decision there. You have a surprisingly accident-based relationship with geography, I said. Memory needs landmarks. Those are not landmarks. Depends how bad the ankle was. He grinned. I watched him instead of the mountains. That had become a problem. I was developing a catalog of things I liked, without having authorized one. The way his voice dropped when he was serious. The faint line across the bridge of his nose that suggested it had once been broken. How easily he talked to strangers, and how selectively he answered personal questions. The shape of his hands, especially the hands. I looked away before that thought became less respectable. So when do you move back? I asked. Wes stopped smiling. There it was. Not offense. The small pause I had been noticing. I don't. I turned toward him. You said you were going home. I am. To Juneau. Yes. Where you grew up. Yes. But you're not moving there. No. I stared at him. He laughed. This feels like a deposition. I'm trying to understand the sentence. It's not complicated. You're going home, but home is not where you live. Now who's being philosophical? I am asking a logistical question. That's your favorite kind. Wes. He tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. I'm going to stay with my dad for 6 weeks. Then, I don't know. That answer irritated me more than it should have. Maybe because he said it without shame. What does your business do for 6 weeks? Continues existing. Without you, I have employees, Calvin. I know. And a foreman who would take deep personal offense at the idea that I'm the only adult holding the building together. So you can just leave? Just is doing some work there. I folded my arms. Wes watched me for a moment. You thought I was moving back. Yes. Why? You said you were going home. Those aren't the same thing. They should have been. At least in my head. I had already built a version of Wes that made sense. 44. Raised in Juneau. Returning because his father needed him. Comfortable in his own skin. Rooted enough to know where he belonged. The kind of man who could answer the question I could not. What happens next? And now he had ruined that by being uncertain too. I looked out toward the water. So what are you deciding? Whether Dad needs more help than he'll admit. Whether the house still works for him. Whether my sister needs backup. Whether I can run Tacoma from Alaska without turning everyone who works for me into alcoholics. That sounds like a lot. It is. And after you solve all that, Wes rubbed his jaw. I'll decide what comes after. I exhaled. He glanced at me. What? Nothing. You made a face. I did not. You absolutely did. I hated how quickly that had become ours. You don't find it uncomfortable? I asked. What? Not knowing. Of course I do. You don't look uncomfortable. That sounds like a complaint. It might be. Wes leaned against the wall beside the window. I'm 44. I've had plans go wrong before. That is not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. The ship moved beneath us with a low mechanical vibration I had stopped noticing, unless I thought about it. Wes looked toward the coastline. I used to think not knowing meant I had failed to plan properly. Then I owned a business for 10 years. And now I think not knowing is what happens after Thursday. I laughed despite myself. He looked at me. And you? What about me? Your contract ends in 12 weeks. I knew where this was going. What happens after? I looked out the window. I don't know. Wes nodded once. It was infuriating. Don't look satisfied. I'm not. You are. I'm enjoying the symmetry. I hate symmetry. Liar. He was right. That was worse. The ferry slowed for a port stop that afternoon. I had read the schedule twice. Wes had not. This should have concerned me. Instead, when we walked off with enough time to stretch our legs and see a little of the town near the terminal, I made the mistake of telling him we had 1 hour and 37 minutes. He stopped walking. 1 hour and 37? That's what the schedule says. You memorized it? No. You absolutely memorized it. I checked. How many times? That isn't relevant. Calvin. Twice. Before breakfast? I kept walking. He caught up easily. You know the ship isn't going to leave early. I know. And we can see it from here. I know. And you still want to know exactly when we should turn around. I like margin. You like control. I like not being stranded. Wes spread his hands toward the small harbor. There are worse places. You say that because you grew up in Alaska. I say that because there's a bar. We walked without a destination after that, mostly because Wes refused to let me invent one. It felt absurdly intimate. Not the location, the lack of structure. I was used to dinners with reservations, meetings with agendas, weekends divided into useful blocks of time. Even dates, when I had managed to have them, tended to become appointments with drinks. Wes wandered into a small shop because he saw a carved wooden raven in the window. Then we left without buying anything. We stood near the harbor while a dog barked at gulls with a level of personal rage that seemed unsustainable. Wes bought 2 pieces of something fried from a food stand. "What is this?" I asked. "Food. That answer is suspicious. You need fewer labels. I spent 15 years in inventory. That explains so much." I bit into it. It was hot enough to burn my tongue. Wes saw my face. "You okay?" "Fine." "You're tearing up." "It's the wind." "There is no wind. I am managing." He laughed so hard he had to look away. I wanted to kiss him. The thought arrived cleanly. Not hypothetically. Not as part of some vague acknowledgement that Wes was attractive. I wanted to grab the front of his jacket and shut him up. I looked at the harbor instead. "Your ears are red," he said. "It's cold." "It's really not." I checked my watch. He groaned. "We have 48 minutes. We have a visible ferry. Those statements can coexist. You're exhausting. You invited me to breakfast. And look where it got me." He smiled at me. I held his gaze too long. This time he noticed. The humor softened. For half a second, neither of us said anything. Then a truck rumbled past behind us, and the moment loosened. Wes looked toward the ship. "Come on," he said, "before you develop a stress rash." That evening, I found him in a quieter lounge near the stern. He had one boot resting on the opposite knee, and a paperback open in his lap. "You read?" He looked up. "No. I carry books to seem approachable. Is it working?" "You're here." I sat beside him, not across. That felt like a decision. We talked for a while about nothing important. His shop, my contract, a couple traveling with 4 children who seemed to consider the entire vessel a climbing structure. Then Wes asked, "Why did you really leave?" I knew what he meant. Not Washington. The company. I looked at the dark window beside us. My reflection looked tired, older than I felt. I kept getting promoted. Wes waited. My dad started the company when I was 11. My sister and I grew up around it. I worked summers, then weekends, then full-time after college. "You liked it?" "For a long time." "That makes leaving harder." "Yes." He said nothing, so I kept going. I became operations director at 32. Bought into the company at 34. Every time I thought maybe I was restless, something improved. More responsibility, more money, more authority. And you still wanted out. I didn't know that was what I wanted. "What did you think you wanted?" The next thing. The answer embarrassed me. Wes didn't smile. I rubbed my palms together. "My father is not a monster. My sister isn't trying to control me. The business is successful. People treated me well." "That sounds terrible." I laughed quietly. "You know what I mean." "I do." That's what made it difficult. There was no catastrophe. Nothing to point at and say, "There. That's why I'm leaving." "So you needed permission." I needed a reason. "Same thing?" "Maybe." Wes closed his book. Our knees were touching. I noticed. He noticed me noticing. Neither of us moved. "What finally happened?" he asked. I thought about the quarterly meeting, the expansion proposal, my father putting a new organizational chart on the screen and circling my name, Vice President of Operations, a role I had technically wanted for years. I got exactly what I thought I was working toward. And I felt trapped. Wes nodded slowly. "That'll do it." "No motivational speech?" "About what?" "Taking control of my life. Choosing myself." He considered. "Sounds expensive." I laughed. "That is annoyingly accurate. Do you miss it?" The question hit harder than it should have. "Yes." I looked down at my hands. "Parts of it." Wes waited. My office. Knowing everyone. My sister yelling questions from the doorway instead of calling. My dad bringing in terrible donuts on Fridays because he refuses to admit the bakery changed owners 6 years ago. Sounds nice. It was. That doesn't mean you should have stayed. I looked at him. He shrugged. "You can miss a thing. You were right to leave." For a moment, I couldn't answer. There was no thesis in his tone. No attempt to fix me. Just a simple statement that allowed two things to be true at once. Our knees were still touching. I became aware of the heat through denim. The room seemed quieter than it had been 30 seconds earlier. "What about you?" I asked. Wes's expression changed. There was that smile again, the one that meant I had reached a door he might not open. "What about me? You keep asking what I left." I turned slightly toward him. "What are you going back to?" He held my gaze. For once, he didn't joke. "My father," he said. "That's who." I waited. Wes looked down at the closed book in his hands. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm still trying to figure out what else." The next morning, the sky cleared enough to turn the water silver. Wes was already outside. He had both hands wrapped around a paper cup. "You found coffee," I said. He looked offended. "I found a hot liquid pretending to be coffee." "That sounds close enough." "It isn't." I stood beside him. He glanced at me. "You sleep?" "Eventually." "You plan that too?" I'm choosing not to answer. Growth. For a few minutes we watched the shoreline without talking. It was becoming easier to do that with him. That surprised me. I had spent most of my adult life believing silence between two people needed justification. Work, driving, reading, being angry. Otherwise someone should fill it. With Wes, silence did not feel empty. It felt occupied. He took a drink, made a face, and poured the rest away. "You paid for that." "I made a mistake. You abandoned things quickly." He looked at me. I immediately regretted the sentence. "Sorry." "No." Wes rested his forearms against the rail. "That one was fair." I waited. He looked older that morning, not in a bad way, just tired. There were darker shadows under his eyes, and some of the easy humor from the day before was missing. "Did something happen?" Mara called. "Your sister?" He nodded. "Dad tried to move a tool cabinet by himself. That sounds dangerous." "It was stupid." "Is he okay?" "Fine." Bruised his hip, scared himself, then got mad at Mara for being scared. "So what happens when you get there?" "That's the problem." He rubbed one hand over his face. "Everybody keeps asking me that. What does your father actually need?" "Some transportation. Probably help with groceries for a while. Somebody to make the bathroom safer. Maybe a rail by the back steps. He's been pretending his balance is fine. You can do those things." "Yeah. And after?" Wes stared at the water. "There you are again." "What?" "After. That is generally how time works." He smiled, but it didn't last. "My sister has 2 kids. She teaches full-time. Her husband travels for work. She's been doing most of this already." "So you feel guilty?" "I feel useful." "That wasn't what I said." He looked at me. I almost apologized. Instead, I let the sentence stay where it was. Wes turned back toward the water. "When Mom died, Dad became the one who checked on everybody else. Me, Mara, the neighbors, half the street." "How long ago?" 8 years. "I'm sorry." He was 71 going on 50, until about a month ago. Wes's thumb ran over the scar on his index finger. Then suddenly he wasn't. He swallowed. "I don't like how much that bothered me." "Because he got hurt?" "Because I realized I liked believing he would always be the one who didn't need anything." That was the first thing Wes had said that sounded like it had surprised him too. I waited. He continued. "I kept telling Mara I'd come up and handle things. The house, appointments, whatever. You said handle." "I know. You say that a lot. Apparently I have a witness now." I smiled. He did too, faintly. Then he said, "If Dad needs me there longer, I stay longer." The answer came too quickly. "What if he doesn't?" Wes went still. There it was again, that door. But this time he did not smile. "I don't know. What do you want?" His jaw tightened. I immediately understood I had pushed harder than I meant to. That sounded more aggressive than intended. No, it didn't. "Fair." He looked toward the mountains. "I want Dad okay." "That's not the same question." "I know." The words came sharper this time. I stopped. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. A gull passed close enough to the ship that I could hear the wings. Finally, Wes said, "I'm really good at figuring out what needs doing." I noticed. That wasn't a compliment. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I'm less good when nobody needs anything." I understood that sentence more than I wanted to. Not because we were the same. We weren't. I needed plans. Wes needed requirements. Different structures. Same relief. If someone else defined the problem, You could spend all your energy solving it, and none deciding who you wanted to be afterward. I almost said that. Then I remembered how unbearable it sounded when someone translated your life back to you too neatly. So I said, "That sounds exhausting." Wes laughed once. Yeah. Later that afternoon, we ate lunch together, then dinner. Neither of us said anything about how unusual it was to spend nearly every available hour with someone we had met 2 days earlier. We also stopped pretending coincidence had anything to do with it. When I came into a room, I looked for him. When he found me, his face changed. Not dramatically. Enough. That evening, the ferry moved through a long stretch of dark water under a clear sky. Most passengers had gone inside. Wes and I stood on the outer deck with the cold pushing through our jackets. "You're staring," he said. I was. "At what?" "Me." "That's presumptuous. You're bad at lying. That is demonstrably false." Wes turned toward me. The deck lights caught gray in his beard. I had spent the last hour trying not to think about his mouth. Now he was close enough that thinking about anything else seemed absurd. He said, "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Trying to decide what happens next." I laughed under my breath. "Maybe. You don't have to." That should have annoyed me. Instead, it loosened something. I stepped closer. Wes stopped breathing for half a second. There was the answer. Not certainty, not permission handed to me in a perfectly worded sentence. Just a man staying exactly where he was when he could have moved. I put one hand against his side. His hand came to my arm. I kissed him. For 1 second, I thought I had misjudged everything. Then Wes pulled me closer. The second kiss was warmer, longer. His hand moved from my arm to the back of my neck, and I felt the rough edge of his thumb near my ear. I had forgotten how destabilizing it was to want someone this quickly. Not because I did not date. I did. But most attraction in my life had arrived with paperwork. "Where do you live? What do you do? What are you looking for? How long have you been single?" Wes had somehow gotten ahead of all that. When we finally separated, he was smiling. "What?" "Nothing." "You made a face." "I did not." "You absolutely. Don't ruin this." He laughed. I kissed him again just to stop him. When we pulled apart, neither of us immediately looked away. Then Wes said, "Are we going to regret making this complicated?" I should have had a better answer. Instead, I said, "It was complicated before we did that." He studied me, then nodded. "Okay, that's all? What do you want? A contract?" "Maybe bullet points." There he is. The next morning, my sister called. I almost ignored it. Then I saw her name and answered. "Claire? Did I wake you?" "No." "Are you alone?" I glanced across the lounge. Wes was 20 feet away, pretending to read. "Yes." Claire exhaled. "I talked to Dad." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Nothing bad. We're ready to finalize the ownership transfer Friday." I already knew that. Then she said, "He wanted me to ask one more time." I closed my eyes. "Claire, I know. He shouldn't be putting you in the middle." "He isn't. I volunteered." "That is worse." She ignored me. "If you want to pause it 30 days, we can." For several seconds, I heard only the low engine vibration through the floor. 30 days. A month ago, that would have felt like relief. Now it felt like a door I had deliberately walked through, being held open behind me. "You still there?" Claire asked. "Yeah. You don't have to prove anything by finishing this." "I know. Dad knows too." That made it harder. There was no villain. No one demanding I come back. Just people I loved making sure I understood the exit was real. I looked across the lounge. Wes had lowered the book. He could tell something was wrong. "I'll call you back," I said. When I ended the call, Wes came over. "Everything okay?" "My sister." "Company?" I nodded. I told him. All of it. The transfer. My father's last offer. The 30 days. When I finished, Wes was quiet. "What do you think?" I asked. He frowned. "About what? What should I do?" "I have no idea." I stared at him. "You own a business. So? You know what this means." "I know what ownership means. I don't know what that company means to you." "That is deeply unhelpful." "Good." I almost laughed. He leaned back. "If you want to go back, go back." I didn't say that. "If you don't, don't." "That's your advice?" "No. That's me refusing to pretend I understand 15 years of your life because we kissed on a ferry." I looked at him. It was the least romantic thing he could have said. It might also have been the most trustworthy. I called Claire back 20 minutes later. Don't delay it, I said. She was quiet. You sure? No. Yes. Another pause. Then, softly, okay. When the call ended, I did not feel free. I felt sick. Wes did not congratulate me. He sat down beside me. Outside the windows, the ferry kept moving north. For the first time since leaving Bellingham, there was no route back waiting for me if I changed my mind. And somehow, with Wes sitting beside me and asking for nothing, that frightened me less than I expected. Juneau appeared gradually, first as lights through the rain, then roads cut into dark slopes, then houses, then enough shape that I could no longer pretend arrival was theoretical. I stood outside with Wes while the ferry maneuvered toward the terminal. Neither of us said much. That was new. Our silences had been comfortable before. This one had edges. Wes's father and sister were waiting somewhere beyond the dock. My room was booked for 3 nights in town before my flight onward to Anchorage. The ferry had done something useful for us without asking permission. It had removed choice. We had been in the same place because there was nowhere else to go. Breakfast happened because breakfast happened. Walking happened because the ship stopped. Conversation happened because hours needed filling. Now the ramp would lower, and none of that would be automatic anymore. You have everything? Wes asked. Yes. Of course you do. I checked. I know. I looked at him. He smiled, but his eyes did not. The terminal lights grew brighter. I hate this part, I said. Docking? Transitions. That seems inconvenient considering your current lifestyle. I liked you more yesterday. No, you didn't. He was right. I watched workers moving below us. What happens now? Wes exhaled. Dad. Mara. Probably an argument about whether he should still own a ladder. I know what you meant. I stopped. He looked at me. There were a dozen things I could have asked. Will I see you again? Was that just the ferry? Do you want this? Should I stay longer? Instead, I said, I hope your dad is okay. Wes's face softened. Thanks. When passengers started gathering their bags, we went inside. At the terminal, everything became badly timed. Announcements, luggage, people blocking doorways, a child crying because he had dropped a glove. I saw a woman near the exit wave at Wes with both arms. Mara, presumably. Beside her stood an older man with silver hair, a cane he looked annoyed to be using, and the expression of someone who had already decided Wes was overreacting to his condition. Wes saw them. Something in his posture changed immediately. Not fear, responsibility. He looked at me. That's them, I figured. We stood there for one awkward second too long. Then Wes stepped closer and touched my arm. Not dramatic, not private enough for more. Calvin. Yeah? He looked like he was going to say something larger. He didn't. Good luck with Anchorage. That hurt more than it should have. You too. With Anchorage? With the ladder. He laughed. Then I did something I was proud of only later. I let him go. No last-minute question. No attempt to extend the moment until one of us gave it a meaning neither could support yet. Wes walked toward his family. His father immediately said something that made him roll his eyes. Mara hugged him hard enough to move him backward. I watched for 5 seconds. Then I turned toward the taxi line. No one came after me. I did not turn around. My hotel room was aggressively beige. I unpacked, because apparently I had decided to become a man who unpacked for 3 nights. Then I spent 10 minutes staring at my phone. Nothing. I put it face down. 5 minutes later, I checked again. Still nothing. This was humiliating. At 6, Claire texted, "Transfer complete." Then, "Dad says he is not calling because he doesn't want to make it a thing." I laughed alone in the room. "Tell him I'm fine." Claire replied, "He says that sounds suspicious." I sat on the edge of the bed. The company was gone. Not literally. It would continue operating. My father would still complain about invoices. Claire would still run finance. The warehouse would still smell like rubber hose, cardboard, machine oil, and coffee no one admitted was bad. But my ownership was finished. For the first time since I was 24, Rourke Marine Supply was not part of my formal future. I expected grief. I got it. I expected relief. That came too. What surprised me was how ordinary both feelings felt. At 9:30 the next morning, my phone buzzed. Wes. One message. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" I read it twice. Then, Because dignity is fragile, I waited almost 4 minutes before answering. Yes, he replied immediately. Dinner? I smiled. Yes. A second message arrived. See? Planning. I laughed out loud. The next evening, Wes picked a small restaurant downtown. No Ferry cafeteria, no engine vibration under our feet, no excuse. When I walked in, he was already there. The first thing I noticed was that I had missed him. Not theoretically, physically. His face, his voice when he said my name, the strange calm I felt around someone I had known less than a week. You look tired, I said. Great opening. You do. So do you. I've been resting. You're bad at it. We sat. For several minutes, the conversation felt oddly formal. Then Wes told me his father had tried to convince him that a cane was a conspiracy invented by physical therapists. I laughed, and the awkwardness broke. How bad is it? I asked. Not as bad as I feared. Worse than he admits. What does that mean? Means he can live alone if he stops treating every limitation like a personal insult. Good luck with that. Thank you. Wes rubbed both hands over his face. Mara wants him to accept rides for a while. He wants to drive. I want to take his truck keys and throw them into the channel. That sounds healthy. I'm handling it beautifully. He smiled. Then his expression changed. Would you meet him? The question surprised me. Your father? And Mara? Nothing dramatic. We're having dinner tomorrow. Dad has decided I've come home to arrest him. Why me? Because I want you there. He said it simply. No explanation. My pulse changed anyway. I'd like that. Martin Carver disliked me immediately. Or at least he disliked what he thought I represented. You're the consultant, he said when Wes introduced us. I am. Consulting what? Operations. That mean you tell people how to do jobs you don't do. Wes closed his eyes. Marty. What? I invited him to dinner. I'm talking to him. I liked Martin at once. His house was modest and warm, with old framed photographs everywhere, and a view of mountains that would have doubled property values in Washington. Mara was younger than Wes by 3 years, practical, sharp, and apparently immune to both men's attempts at charm. Martin used his cane exactly twice while I was watching. The rest of the time, he left it against furniture and pretended nobody noticed. The conversation stayed mostly away from his health until Wes asked whether the contractor had called about the bathroom rail. Martin scowled. I don't need a rail. You nearly fell getting out of the shower. I slipped. That's what falling is, before gravity finishes. Mara pointed her fork at Wes. Thank you. Martin looked at me. You got family? Yes. They bossy? Very. Good. That was not permission to recruit him, Wes said. Martin ignored him. I can cook. I can shop. I can get to appointments. Mara said, you can do most of that. I can do all of it. You can't drive for another few weeks. I can. You legally shouldn't. Different sentence. Wes sat back and rubbed his jaw. I saw it then. The version of him I had not seen on the ferry. Everything in his body sharpened when someone needed something. His attention narrowed. His humor disappeared. He started organizing. I can stay until we know whether the dizziness is done. I can handle the house stuff. I can move the shop schedule around another month if I need to. Martin looked at him. No. Wes blinked. What? You heard me. You're not doing this alone. I didn't say I was. Mara already has enough. I'm sitting here, Mara said. Martin kept looking at Wes. I need some help. I don't need your life. Wes's mouth tightened. This is not the time to make some point about independence. No, this is exactly when. The room went quiet. I looked down at my plate. This was family, not mine. Martin sighed. I'll take the rides. We'll put in the rails. Mara can help with appointments. We can pay somebody twice a week if we need it. Wes said nothing. Martin looked at him more gently. You don't get to move back because I bruised my hip. I didn't say I was moving back. No. You just started rearranging everything, like the decision was already made. Wes glanced at me. Only for a second. But I saw it. The same thing he had done on the ferry. Duty arrived. And with it, relief. Because if his father needed him indefinitely, Wes did not have to answer anything else. Not Tacoma. Not Juneau. Not me. Martin changed the subject 5 minutes later. Nobody analyzed what had happened. Mara asked me embarrassing questions about consulting. Martin told me a story about Wes falling off a dock at 14. Wes threatened to leave. I laughed harder than I should have. Later, outside, Wes walked me toward my hotel. You okay? I asked. Fine. That sounded convincing. He shoved his hands into his pockets. Dad's stubborn. So are you. Are you taking his side? I've known him 90 minutes. I don't have a side. That's annoyingly reasonable. We stopped at a corner. My flight to Anchorage was the next morning. Wes knew it. I knew it. Neither of us mentioned it until he finally said, "What time do you leave?" "Morning." He nodded. I waited. A stupid part of me wanted him to say don't. He didn't. Instead he said, "You should go." I laughed once. That sounded enthusiastic. You know what I mean. Unfortunately, I did. I had chosen Anchorage before meeting Wes. He had a father, a sister, a business, and decisions that did not belong to me. If either of us changed direction now because the other man existed, we would never know what we had actually chosen. So the next morning, I left Juneau. Wes kissed me goodbye before I went. No promises, no speech, just his hand at my side, my fingers gripping his jacket, and a kiss that made leaving significantly less convenient than it had been before. When we separated, he said, "Talk soon." Define soon. He smiled. There he is. Then I went north. For once, I did not know exactly when I would see him again, and for once, I went anyway. By the end of my first week in Anchorage, 4 things had become true. The ownership transfer was final. My temporary apartment had stopped feeling like a hotel room. The consulting job was better than I had expected. And Wes and I had spoken 5 times, without deciding what any of those conversations made us. That last one bothered me most. Not because the calls were bad. They were embarrassingly good. Wes called from his father's kitchen, while Martin argued with a home care company on speakerphone. I called from a grocery store, because I had somehow purchased 6 kinds of mustard and no breakfast food. He sent me a photo of a railing he had fabricated years earlier that had survived a truck backing into it. I sent him a photo of the view from the office where I was consulting. He replied, "Looks fake." I wrote, "That is because you live around mountains and have become difficult." He wrote, "You noticed. We did not call every night. That was probably healthy. I still noticed the nights we did not. My contract was with a regional transport company that had grown faster than its internal systems. The work was familiar enough to make me useful, and unfamiliar enough to keep me awake. For the first time in years, people asked my opinion without knowing my father. Nobody introduced me as Claire's brother. Nobody knew the story of the summer I had accidentally ordered 3 pallets of the wrong fittings at 19 and spent a decade hearing about it. I liked that, more than I expected. I also liked knowing the contract had an end date. That was less encouraging. On Thursday evening, Wes called while I was still at the office. "You working?" "Yes. It's almost 7. I'm consulting." "That is not a medical exemption." I smiled and leaned back in the borrowed chair. "What are you doing?" "Arguing with Dad about rugs." "That sounds intense." "He has 3 that slide. So remove them. He says they tie the room together. Your father has aesthetic principles. My father has a death wish." I laughed. Then I heard a door close on his end. Wes's voice changed slightly. "Sorry. For what?" "I've been talking about Dad for 20 minutes. 14. There was a pause. "You timed it?" "No. You absolutely did." I smiled. "Occupational reflex. What about you? What about me? How's the job?" I looked through the glass wall into an empty conference room. "Good. Just good?" I hated when he noticed the difference between my short answers. "Really good, actually." That sounds surprised. It is. Why? Because I don't know anybody. That usually makes jobs worse. For me, apparently not. I stood and walked toward the window. Anchorage in September had a kind of hard clarity I liked. The light felt different. The scale of everything did too. I keep waiting for someone to ask me what Dad thinks. Wes was quiet. "And nobody does," I said. "Because they hired you." "I know." The sentence came out softer than I meant. Wes did not fill the space. I appreciated that. Then he said, "You sound happy." "I might be. That seems inconvenient." "Extremely." He laughed. For another 10 minutes we talked about work. His shop in Tacoma had landed a municipal contract while he was gone. My project had expanded. Martin had finally agreed to use a ride service twice a week. Mara had arranged a physical therapist. The bathroom rail was installed. The rugs were apparently still under negotiation. When the call ended, I stared at my phone longer than necessary. Happy, maybe, but not settled. Those were different things. That became obvious 3 days later. Wes called on Sunday night. He sounded tired. Not bad, just worn down. You okay? I asked. Yeah. Long day? Dad had a good day, which somehow required everyone else to have a terrible one. I laughed. What happened? He decided he could drive. Oh, exactly. Did he? He made it to the end of the driveway before Mara saw him. That feels like progress. Please never work in healthcare. I was sitting on the floor, because I had not yet bought enough furniture to make adulthood convincing. My laptop was open on the coffee table. There was a spreadsheet behind Wes's face. He was calling from his father's back porch. Rain moved behind him. Your 6 weeks are almost up, I said. The words came out before I decided to ask. Wes's expression changed. Yeah, so what happens? He looked away. There it was. Again, the pause. The door. Only now it irritated me. I don't know yet. I leaned back against the couch. What don't you know? Dad's doing better, but not completely. Mara's overloaded. I need to get back to Tacoma. The shop needs me there physically for some things. That sounds like you know several things. Wes exhaled. Calvin. What? You're doing the thing. What thing? The interrogation. I'm asking what your plan is. I don't have one. That's not really true. His jaw tightened. I should have stopped. I didn't. You know Tacoma needs you. You know your father doesn't need you here full time. You know Mara can't carry all of it. Yes. So what are you deciding? Wes leaned back in his chair. I'm deciding how to do this without making everybody else's life harder. That's not the same as deciding what you want. He went still. I knew immediately I had hit something real. That did not make the delivery good. You want to know what I want? He asked. Yes. I want Dad not to have gotten old this fast. I closed my mouth. Wes continued. I want Mara not to be exhausted. I want my shop to stop sending me pictures every time something goes wrong like I'm a parent at summer camp. I want to stop checking my phone at 2 in the morning because I'm waiting for somebody to need me. His voice had sharpened. And I want you to stop asking me for an answer like there is one clean version of this. I felt heat rise into my face. I'm not asking for clean. Aren't you? No. You want to know where I'll be in a month. Yes. Where will you be? I stopped. Anchorage. For how long? 12 weeks. Then, I said nothing. Wes looked at me through the screen. There. That's not the same. Why? Because I'm not pretending my contract is a life plan. And I'm not pretending 6 weeks with Dad tells me where I should live. That's not what I'm asking. What are you asking? I opened my mouth. The answer was embarrassingly simple. Us. I wanted to know what he planned to do about us. But saying it made me feel 12. So I reached for something smarter. That everything with you becomes something you'll answer when somebody needs an answer. Wes stared at me. I regretted it immediately. Not because it was entirely wrong, because it was too neat, too close to accusation, disguised as insight. He rubbed both hands over his face. Do you hear yourself? Yes. No, I don't think you do. I stiffened. And everything with you needs a destination before you'll admit you're already in it. There was silence. I looked away from the screen. That sounds like something you've been saving. No, it sounds like something I'm annoyed enough to finally say badly. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Wes leaned forward. I like you, Calvin. My chest tightened. I know. Do you? Yes. Because sometimes I think if I can't tell you what airport I'll be closest to in March, you think I'm withholding something. I need more than accidental contact. The words came out faster than I intended. Wes stopped. That, at least, was true. I forced myself to continue. I don't need a relocation plan. I don't need 6 months mapped out. But I can't do this only when a Ferry, or your father, or my contract happens to put us close enough. His face changed. The anger eased. Not completely. Okay, I waited. That's all? No. He looked down. I don't know what I can promise yet. Then don't promise it. He looked back up. But choose something. The call ended 20 minutes later. Not badly. Not well. We did not break anything. There was nothing formal enough to break. But when the screen went dark, I knew the conversation had changed us. I had asked for intention. Wes had asked me to stop pretending intention meant certainty. Both requests felt reasonable. That was annoying. 3 days later, Wes called again. He looked different, lighter. What happened? I asked. Dad fired me. I sat up. What? From being his full-time emergency government. I laughed. Wes smiled. Then he told me. Martin had agreed to scheduled rides. Mara would handle one medical appointment a week, no more. They had hired someone to come by twice weekly for errands and heavier work. Wes had arranged future visits north. And he was going back to Tacoma. When? I asked. Friday. I felt something shift. You decided. Apparently. How do you feel? Terrible. I laughed. Good. Also relieved. Better. And guilty. That seems on brand. Wes pointed at the screen. Careful. I smiled. Then he said, I kept waiting for Dad to need enough that staying would become obvious. I stayed quiet. He shrugged. He didn't. So you're leaving. I'm going home. The phrase landed differently this time. Tacoma? Yeah. And Juneau. Wes looked toward something off screen. Also home, I think. I understood that. Maybe more than I would have a month earlier. He looked back at me. And Calvin? Yeah? I heard what you said. I waited. About accidental contact. My pulse changed. Wes did not make a speech. He did not promise anything. He just said, give me a couple days. Then he smiled. I'm trying something new. What? Planning. Wes called me on Tuesday evening. I was halfway through reheating soup and answering an email at the same time, which was how I had accidentally begun living in Anchorage. You busy? He asked. Yes. Good. I need your calendar. I stopped typing. My calendar? You asked for intention. I did. I have some. That got my attention. I closed the laptop. Wes was back in Tacoma. I could tell from the background before he said anything. Metal shelving. Fluorescent lights. The edge of some enormous piece of equipment behind him. His shop. His actual life. It was the first time I had seen him there. You're at work. Very observant. You look different. That sounds dangerous. No. Just, I studied the screen. In Juneau, Wes had always looked slightly temporary. Even inside his father's house, some part of him had been waiting for the next task. Here, he fit. There were safety glasses pushed on top of his head. His sleeves were rolled up. Somebody yelled something from off-screen, and Wes yelled back that he was on the phone, and the building would survive for 5 minutes without him. Then he looked at me again. What weekends are you free next month? My pulse jumped. I tried not to let it show. Why? Because I'm trying to visit you. I failed not to let it show. Wes smiled. Calvin. What? You made a face. I did not. You absolutely did. I turned away and opened the calendar on my laptop. Second weekend is clear. October? Yes. Friday through Sunday? I checked. Yes. He looked down at something beside him. I can get there Friday afternoon. I stared at him. You already checked flights. Don't sound so shocked. I'm proud of you. Careful. I laughed. Wes looked back at the screen. The humor left his face, but not the warmth. I can give you the second weekend of October. The sentence was so practical that it should not have done anything to me. Instead, my throat tightened. He continued. I have to be back Monday. I need to check in with Dad Sunday night. There's a fabrication deadline the week after. None of that changed. I know. I'm not offering you a plan for spring. I know. I'm offering 3 days. I leaned back. 3 days. A month earlier, I would have heard limitation. Now I heard choice. Wes had taken a life full of responsibilities and found actual space inside it. Not leftover space. Not accidental proximity. Space with my name on it. Do you want it? He asked. I smiled. Yes. He nodded once. Good. Is that all? What were you expecting? I don't know. Something more romantic. I checked 3 airlines. Never mind. I'm overwhelmed. He laughed. After we ended the call, I sat in my quiet apartment and looked around. My apartment. That was still a strange phrase. Temporary furniture. Rented dishes. A coat hooked over a chair because I had not bought anything for the wall. Nothing about the place suggested permanence. For once, that did not make it meaningless. The next 3 weeks passed quickly. Work expanded. My initial contract had been about workflow problems. By October, I was sitting in meetings about regional expansion and being asked whether I wanted to stay involved beyond 12 weeks. I did not answer immediately. That was new. I asked what the actual work would be. That was newer. Claire called one evening and told me Dad had finally taken my name off the old office door. Was he dramatic? I asked. No. Really? He complained about the adhesive. That sounds right. How are you? I looked out my apartment window at the early evening. Good. You coming back? There it was. Not pressure. Just a question. I don't know. Claire was silent for a second. Then she said, You sound less upset about that than you used to. I am. Good. She did not ask about Wes. I had told her there was someone. She had responded with 9 questions, so I had stopped giving her useful information. Friday arrived colder than I expected. I went to the airport too early. Not extremely early. Reasonably early. 46 minutes early. Wes texted from the plane after landing. You standing at baggage claim already? I looked around guiltily. No. His reply came immediately. Liar. When he appeared through the doors, carrying one small duffel bag, the first thing I felt was relief. Then desire. Then something less manageable. Wes saw me. His whole face changed. That was becoming one of my favorite things. He walked faster. So did I. We stopped close enough that there was a brief, ridiculous second where neither of us seemed sure what level of reunion 3 weeks of distance justified. Then Wes grabbed the front of my jacket and kissed me. Problem solved. I laughed against his mouth. People moved around us with luggage. Nobody cared. When we separated, Wes looked at me. You okay? Yes. You look alarmed. I had a plan. For the greeting, there were options. He kissed me again. Better? Yes. Good. The weekend was not magical. That might have been the best thing about it. My car battery complained Saturday morning. The restaurant I had selected for dinner lost our reservation. Wes hated the museum exhibit I had confidently told him he would love. It's 6 rooms about municipal drainage, he said. It had excellent reviews. From plumbers? I thought you liked fabrication. That does not mean I dream about culverts. I laughed so hard a woman nearby glared at us. By Saturday afternoon, we had abandoned most of my itinerary. We walked instead. Anchorage had become familiar enough that I could show him places I liked, but unfamiliar enough that I still occasionally turned the wrong direction. Wes found this deeply entertaining. At one point, he took my hand. No ceremony. We were crossing a street. Then we kept holding on after we reached the other side. I looked down. Wes noticed. Too much? No. Good. We continued walking. Later, back at my apartment, he opened the refrigerator and stared inside. You own 6 kinds of mustard. That is old information. You still have them. I'm committed now. To mustard. I'm learning. He turned toward me. You know what's weird? What? You have a place. I looked around. That is generally how apartments work. No. He leaned against the counter. I mean, this looks like you now. I followed his eyes. There were books on the table. A framed print Claire had mailed me. Actual groceries. A coat hook I had installed after 3 weeks of refusing to buy one because that apparently felt like a mortgage. You're right. Does that bother you? A little. Wes smiled. Then I said, less than it used to. That evening we talked about what we were doing. Not in bed. Not during some heightened moment. We were sitting on the floor eating takeout because I still had only 2 chairs, and one of them had become structurally suspicious. I don't want to call this nothing, I said. Wes nodded. Me neither. I also don't know where I'll be in January. I know. You'll be in Tacoma. Probably. I gave him a look. He laughed. Okay. Yes. Tacoma. And Juneau? Every few weeks for now. Your dad? Annoying. Improving. He bought a new rug specifically because Mara removed the old ones. That sounds healthy. He claims it has better grip. Does it? No. I smiled. Then Wes became more serious. I want to date you. The directness surprised me. Not because I doubted it, because he had stopped hiding inside circumstances. I want that too. Long distance. For now. Without pretending one of us knows when that changes. I took a breath. That part is harder. I know. But yes. Wes studied my face. You sure? No. He laughed. I smiled. But yes. That seemed to satisfy him. Sunday morning arrived too quickly. Wes's flight was just after noon. We walked outside before breakfast because neither of us was ready to start packing. The air was sharp and clean. For some reason, I thought about the ferry, about standing at the rail, watching Bellingham shrink behind me. Back then, I had believed movement told me something. Away meant freedom, toward meant commitment, north meant change, home meant one place. It all seemed less convincing now. Wes was beside me with both hands in his pockets. "When are you free next?" he asked. "I don't know." He glanced over. That was enough to make me laugh. "Give me a second." I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. We stood there together, comparing work, his next Juneau trip, my contract deadlines. No grand plan. Just two adults looking for another piece of time. "What about the first weekend in November?" I asked. Wes checked. "I can make that work." "Tacoma? If you want." I looked at him. "You know where you'll be by then?" He smiled. "Mostly. Show off. What about you?" I looked past him at the mountains. "No idea. Does that bother you?" I considered the question. "Less than it used to." Wes nodded. That was enough. I put my phone away. "I know where I want to be that weekend." His expression softened. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He reached for my hand. This time I did not look down to check what it meant. I already knew.